Hello everybody, welcome to my code demonstration. We're still working on the bookstore web app, but I refactored the code to TypeScript, which is a strongly typed language. And the benefits of doing that are with strongly typed languages, you run into a lot less errors. So code maintenance is less. So I initially programmed this store in just JavaScript and React, but I went through the code and rewrote it in TypeScript. And so the functionality is still the same. I went over more in depth in the last video, but it's all the same. But it's just coded in TypeScript now. So I still have, I can log in with Google. So it's all here, the books, right? But yeah, so as far as the functionality of the actual web app, it's all the same. I wanted to improve it and add some more. I wanted to add like payment using Stripe, but I never got around to that. But yeah, it's all the same. So let me show you the code. So let's just start. So I can't go over all the code because there is 47,709 lines of code, and I don't have time to walk you through everything. But the technologies I used are React, well, JavaScript, React, TypeScript. For the front end, I used AWS Amplify to create a bunch of components, which is really nice because I hate designing things with CSS. So what that looks like is this folder is all generated by AWS Amplify, and I highly recommend it because I didn't have to waste a bunch of time designing these things. They just I can design them in Figma, and then AWS Amplify creates it. So, and then it also gave me a bunch of like default components that I was using. Like for example, the let me show you this authenticator component. This is pre-configured, everything, even the fields. So that submits the username and password to AWS Cognito Pool, which is another technology I use. But yeah, so AWS Amplify, really useful for component generation. But let's go through the index. We'll go over index, which is like the root, and app and the auth utils, and then I'll briefly go over these two components I created. So in index, well, if you've ever worked with React, all you're doing is React is you can think of it as like a tree of components. So the main component is this app component, and all we're doing is rendering that app component onto the root element, which is where is it? So if you go to the index.html, you'll see it's pretty barren, but we do have this div with the ID root, and that's where the entire app is being rendered. So not much to see in here, just I use a theme provider provided by Amplify again, which is nice. So a lot of the styling didn't have to mess with, which is the best part because I'm not too good at it. Here's the app component. in this, so the difference between this code and the code I wrote for this store in JavaScript is everything has to have types. So as you can see, this app is with this is how you declare types in TypeScript. You put a colon and then the type. And this react.fc stands for react.functional component, which is a type. So that way TypeScript knows the type, right? Because you can't leave anything. It's just like a C or C++ where everything has to be typed along with. So if you have a function, you have to have a return type, right? Another interesting thing that changed was the React useState hook also needs types. So in this, we have a user type and a set user, which sets this user variable. And I declared the type as it's either going to be someone's logged in or someone's not logged in. And when you're logged in, the data type, so I used Cognito user pool with Amazon AWS. And so I set that user variable to the current user, which will be a Cognito user. And this was convenient because usually you'd have to like declare an interface, which is a special class that shows the structure of what that the Cognito user object would look like. But I was able to just import that class from Amazon Cognito identity. So I didn't have to like go through and because I'll show you what that class that object looks like. And it's pretty complicated. So if I go to the console here in the browser, I return I logged the current user, and as you can see, it's pretty. If I hadn't imported that class, I'd have to create it, and yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of nested types. So yeah, it would have been a nightmare to do that. So it's cool that I could just import that, which is nice. But anyways, so yeah, the use state for this user variable is going to either be null because no one's signed in, or Cognito user. And this function uses this is for authentication. I haven't implemented any authorization. Like I plan to implement JWT, which is JSON web tokens for the word is slipping me, but for pretty much it's gonna, when someone logs in, the UI is gonna be reactive to the type of user, and I will use JSON web tokens to consistently check what this current user has access to. There's a word anyway, but I use this async function, and this get user function is in this auth file that I created, and I imported it. But pretty much this is just a hook that sets that user, right? So this get user is going to return either a Cognito user or a null. So if someone tries to log in and there's an error for some reason, it'll just return null, which is the default for this user variable. But the UI is reactive to an extent for if there's a user logged in or not logged in, right? So I don't know, I'll show that real quick. But when you're logged in, you have like the name right here, or you can't see, let me move it. So you can see my name's right there. And And then the nav bar is a little bit more. There's a little bit more. There's a few more options, right? Like a redeem code. So like say there's a code they have and they want to redeem it to get a book or whatever. And then you have the your books, so the books you've bought, right? And when I log out, you'll see that now the user use state is now null because no one's logged in. So it'll say this user is not authenticated, as you can see right here. And the nav bar is a little bit more simple. They don't have the option to redeem codes because they have to log in to do that, right? And you're not going to be able to see your books unless you're logged in. So yeah, so it is reactive to an extent, but I'm not implementing JWT or anything like that yet. So anyway, but yeah, so there's just two UI components, and these are the pages I created. They're pages, but they're technically just components too. They're just a bigger component with a lot of little components in them, like, so it's like a tree, right? I'll just quickly go over the auth util. So I amplify auth class, and that's handling. This is just a useful class that checks if there's a current authenticated user, right? So as you can see, I have it typed, right? This function is typed. It's going to return a promise. So it's kind of, so promise is well, see this await keyword. It immediately returns a promise, which is saying, hey, I'm going to return something in the future, because this has to reach out to the Cognito user pool server I created, and it's either going to return, that promise is going to either return a Cognito user or null if there's an error for some reason, right? So we declare this user variable and await auth.get or auth that current authenticated user, which returns well, I guess it says it returns a promise, but it will either return a promise or a null or an error, right? So it's going to get that, and then I log that user to the console and return the user, which back in the app. So see const fetched user, await get user, it returns. This variable will be set to that Cognito user once it's finished, and otherwise it's gonna throw an error and set the user to null, which, yeah. These, I'm just gonna go over the authenticated. So these pages are very similar besides the navbar, which is the only thing that's really changing when a user is logged in or logged out. But I guess I went over this in more detail in my last video on this web app, so feel free to check it out. There's also a lot of comments, and I'll link the Git repo in the description if you want to check it out. But these are just the overrides for behavior and style, and pretty much Amplify returns these components, and I want to tweak them a little bit to give them a different functionality or just like a style. So I render the browse book authenticated page, right, which I designed in Figma, and that has a component inside it called book action card collection, which is pretty much this whole collection of books, right? These are action cards, and this is a collection of action cards, right? And this is just some behavior for if you click on it, it's going to open the details, right? And I have this, I know I could do it better, but I should figure this out, but I render a close bar component. I'll show you that because I guess it's just lazy code, but when I click this bar right here is actually a component. right? So, and all that does is if I click the X, it goes back to the main page. I should probably just implement that into this details page, but I'll get around to it. So if I click that, it's going to go back to this, right? But and then yeah, so this is just I have an active content index, and when I click certain things, this useState hook is set to different values, which then renders different things, right? So the contact us modal, or the redeem code modal, which I showed you earlier. Yeah, so that those are rendered conditionally, depending on that active content index. The last thing I'll go over is this TypeScript config file. There's a lot in here, and I left comments for all of them, so feel free to read through them. But the most important ones are the target, which is the target JavaScript version, and I use ES5, which isn't the latest, but since I use so many different technologies, they didn't like the compatibility between all the technologies I use and ES6, which is the latest. It was buggy, so I just set it back to ES5, and it smoothed out a lot of issues. The other really important thing in here is JSX, which is the React pretty much file type. So it's just saying that we're using React for React development, right? And this include is, for example, if I didn't, so by default, it's just gonna TypeScript is gonna compile all of the files in this directory, but I don't. It just speed up compilation. I just included the source directory, which is in. It's a this has all the code that I want to TypeScript to compile. For example, I don't want it to compile node modules, which is a huge. I don't want it to do that. It takes forever. And I think by default it doesn't, but I just like, being sure, right? But yeah, I guess this lib is including the libraries for DOM manipulation and iteration, right? So that's important. And strict, just even more enhanced type safety. And allow JS is important. So there are some JavaScript files, for example, that I want TypeScript to allow. So like I use an index.js just for cleaner imports, right? So TypeScript knows, hey, this is allowed. And yeah, source maps is cool for developers. It just helps for debugging. So in the browser console, I can go to sources and it'll show a source map. So let me show you that. So if I go to this up a little bit more, sources. So where are they? Yeah, so here's the source map, which just when TypeScript compiles TypeScript files, it's kind of hard to, because it has to take the TypeScript file and convert it to JavaScript, and those files are kind of hard to read, and having a source map, that option makes it a little bit easier to read for debugging purposes. But anyways, that's about it. Pretty much the goal was to, this is all just proof of concept, but for my future web apps, I'll be writing them in TypeScript. So because a lot of time is spent on just debugging, and using TypeScript will eliminate a lot of wasted time on debugging. So that's about it. I'll leave the Git repo in the description, and you can clone it and look at it if you want. Thank you for watching my code demonstration.